Okay, so here we are at last, slide one, just a typical introductory slide. But note that John Charles Olmsted did visit Portland along with Seattle and Spokane in 1903. And he did produce the first master plan for a park system for the city of Portland at the very end of the year. So you see the date on the plan on the slide is 1904, but it actually arrived, I think, on December 31st, 1903. And his recommendations were quite detailed and did include the idea of a connected system of parks. And I think that was a theme that was pretty familiar from the old Olmsted firm back in that time. So next slide, please. So the firm actually did not provide a map view of the Olmsted plan. But so what we have are interpretations that were faithfully taken from the actual document by the first two superintendents of Portland Parks, Emanuel Mish and Charles Paul Kaiser. And so when we show these kinds of Olmsted plan maps, just know that they are interpretations from a written document. Next slide. So after 50 years of work, so we're going to play some really rapid history here, and that did include some really wonderful accomplishments. Only about 30% of the system's connections were realized. So when you look at the map here, this is a map that I made using that previous older map, and I superimposed it over Google Maps and tried to identify what actually was built on the ground versus what was not. Everything that's shown in that sort of reddish color is actually an Olmsted linkage or boulevard success. So we have a number of them scattered around the city, but not all the connections were made. And I think it's probably fair to say that, World War I and World War II and the Great Depression had a lot to do with it. But also, I think there was some lack of political support for completing the system, unfortunately. But we do enjoy those boulevards that did come forth out of that first 1903 plan. There's in Southwest Portland, down in the lower left, you can see a rather long boulevard that's known as Terwilliger Boulevard. Wonderful views of the river and the mountains east, and a bike path along Terwilliger Boulevard. And we also, it goes without saying, we had some wonderful parks come out of the system, and they were direct recommendations from the plan. Mount Tabor Park being a spectacular example, and Laurelhurst Park, also in Southeast, not far from where I live. I'm lucky. Next slide, please. So then there was a little hiatus, and not a lot seemed to be done in Portland. And after Kaiser retired, I think the Olmsted plan was shelved and nearly forgotten. A few notable exceptions, though, things didn't come to full stop. Forest Park, which is now the largest forested park in the country, inside the city limits, I have to use all the qualifiers to make sure it's accurate, began to take shape in 1948. So they just celebrated their 75th anniversary. And the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden in Southeast Portland, adjacent to Reed College, was established in 1950. That is a spectacular public garden, well worth seeing, especially at rhododendron bloom time in the spring. And then finally, the Portland Japanese Garden opened in 1967. That is highly regarded as potentially the finest Japanese garden in North America. So things weren't at full stop, but in terms of like big systematic growth, not a lot else happened during those 20 years. Next slide. So I wanted to have something that was symbolic of change. And of course, the 1970s Earth Day occurred in April, but things were happening both at the state level in Oregon and at the local level, beginning in the 1970s. Next slide. We had a bicycle bill that was passed. Signing the bike bill awkwardly on the seat of the bicycle is Governor Tom McCall, whose name will reemerge in the presentation. But this was a period, sort of the first bicycle boom of at least of our lifetimes. And you can see the style of bike. I think I still have one of those in the garage. But anyway, multiple use paths became a design consideration, and they were that was a big step forward for all transportation departments to start thinking in terms of developing bicycle systems. Next slide. We had the famous gasoline shortages of the 1970s, and the reason that these are important for this story is that it spurred conversation among local and state park providers to develop close-to-home recreation opportunities. So I actually have minutes of a meeting that was held in the 70s where some of these ideas were discussed. And it was during those discussions that Doug Bridges, who was then superintendent of Portland Parks, uncovered and called attention to the Olmsted Plan of 1903-04 with all the connected boulevards. So the Olmsted Plan in those discussions quickly became the inspiration for a new project that would become the 40-mile loop to provide close-to-home recreation. Next slide. Okay. So one more slide, please. There we go. Oh, okay. I think I juggled the sequence of these, sorry. So what emerged in 1984, 83, was the 40-mile loop master plan, which provided a look at a plan for the entire system. And you can see by the map that's shown on the right-hand side that the plan was pretty ambitious. Next slide. This is a slide that explains the name 40-mile loop, and we have to do this every time. I'm sorry about this, but let me just say that the 40-mile loop name was really an informal name that was applied to the project, and then it just stuck. And where did it come from? Well, they took out one of these old Olmsted maps and ran a little instrument called an opsisometer around the connections that were drawn on the plan, and it turned out to be 40 miles. And so in a way, the 40-mile loop in name honors the Olmsted Plan of 1903-04. Next slide. And so here we superimpose the Olmsted Plan as it was interpreted by Kaiser onto the 40-mile loop plan, and you can see the relative scale. So my guess is that the current 40-mile loop encompasses probably 5 times the area that the original plan did. And the trail system is actually now 150 miles long and growing. And it connects the cities of Portland, Gresham, Fairview, Troutdale, and Milwaukee. So it was basically a Multnomah County. This is more or less in the shape of Multnomah County urban trail system. And it was our first truly regional trail that we had in the Portland area. Next slide, please. And this is the only one that's animated, but this slide is to communicate that the 40-mile loop really is an assemblage of named trails. So if any of you come to Portland and you ask, I'd like to see the 40-mile loop, you're probably, most likely, going to be greeted with a puzzled expression. But if you ask them, well, where's the East Bank Esplanade, or where's the Marine Drive Trail, or where's Wildwood Trail, they'll be able to tell you. Where's the Springwater Corridor, perhaps our most famous trail that everybody knows about. So the trails actually fly well under their own identity, really. So I wanted to run through kind of a next slide, please, Victoria. A series of slides that show benchmarks or milestones of the 40-mile loop. So we'll go through these fairly quickly, I think. The next slide, please. So our first multiple use path was built in 1973, probably with some of those state highway funds from the bike bill, I'm guessing. But it was 3.9 miles of multiple use path.
There's some little nails sticking out.
Okay.
Someone please mute.
So this trail still exists, and actually the bicyclists who've grown more accustomed to the bike lanes on the boulevard itself use the bike lanes more than they do this path. Note how narrow this path is. This is an 8-foot wide path, and we still have some of those in the system in Portland. Next milestone on the next slide is that the Tom McCall Waterfront Park, or what we call Tom McCall Waterfront Park now, started to form in 1974 when Portland ripped out a highway along the west bank of the Willamette River right in downtown Portland. And so that opened the way for a nice esplanade, wide path of about 16 feet in width next to the river. Next slide. Then we had the Willamette Greenway Code that was developed in Portland, which actually required that private development provide public access to trails along the river. And again, these early trails were pretty narrow, but we did start to see popping up along the Willamette public paths that people could have visual access to the river. Next. Then the Marine Drive Trail began to develop in the early 80s, and this was thanks to great support from Multnomah County, and they even had they were using a county gas tax to make these trails happen. These trails are a little wider. They're probably in the 10 to 12 foot category, and they run along the Columbia River, along the north edge of the 40-mile loop. And of course, the Columbia is one of the great rivers of the West. Portland is a little bit odd in that even though the Columbia River is the dominant river in the region, the city of Portland is settled really on the Willamette River, a tributary to the Columbia. And perhaps the best story is to be told on the next slide. And this is it's a little photo of Ethan Seltzer, who is now a fellow retiree, but he worked for Commissioner Lindbergh back in the 80s, and he pulled off this fantastic deal where he realized that the Oregon Department of Transportation was going to have to rebuild a bridge, a railroad bridge over Highway 99E in Southeast Portland. And he realized that the bridge would cost more than potentially the railroad was worth. And he asked ODOT if they would consider buying the railroad so they wouldn't have to rebuild the bridge. Well, it all worked out. That's the way it worked out. Saved ODOT $500,000 at least. And the city of Portland ended up owning a 17-mile long railroad property beginning in 1990, which later became the Springwater Corridor. It was a coup. Thank you, Ethan. Metro, which is a regional government in Portland, began working on a master plan, ostensibly, initially really, to save open spaces, natural areas in particular, but we insisted that it also include a provision for a regional trail system. And this has paid dividends. Metro has been an incredibly valuable partner because they were in the business. They became engaged in the business of regional trails. And so every time they passed a bond measure, there was a bit of money available to help develop trails. They have been a great conduit for access to federal funds. And especially with smaller jurisdictions, they're very helpful providing acquisition and planning assistance. Next slide. Okay. Did you advance yeah, there we go. Okay, so 1996 was a banner year for the 40-mile loop. You'll see what happened in 96 was we had a peninsula crossing trail open. This is in North Portland, and it transects the North Portland Peninsula, as we call it. And it runs about 3 miles from the Willamette River up towards the Columbia Slough and Columbia River. And then the next thing that happened was after the next slide, please. Sorry. After the acquisition of the Springwater course, it took a few years to find the funds to develop the Springwater Corridor Trail, but we got it done in 1996. And the city of Gresham stepped up and opened up the first section within the city of Gresham city limits in the earlier part of 96, and then Portland section opened up later the next year. And this is an iconic photograph of the Springwater Corridor running east through southeast Portland and through Gresham, right at Mount Hood in the distance. Next slide. We have the opening of the Vericat East Bank Esplanade in 2001. I was working at the time when they were starting to talk about this, and I couldn't believe it that we were going to build a trail basically in the river on the east bank of the Willamette River in downtown Portland. And thanks to the former mayor, Vericat, for having the courage to spend this amount of money on a trail project. The money actually came from an urban renewal source. And it's a spectacular trail floating on the river. And there are 2 swimming docks now that the river is cleaner than it used to be along the East Bank Esplanade, right in downtown Portland. So this is probably a lunchtime exercise loop that you're seeing happening on just a typical weekday. And it's about that busy all the time. Next slide, please. Then this was a hard-fought battle. Portland Department of Transportation didn't really want to build this section of trail, but they were redeveloping Marine Drive in the Rivergate area. This is in North Portland along the Columbia River. And it was a over 2 mile stretch of highway project. And they were supposed to put in a trail, and boy, they didn't want to. They didn't want to spend the money to do it. And we kind of had to use our 40-mile loop friends. I was a city staffer at the time, and gang up on them a little bit, but it made a difference. It made that piece of trail a reality. Next slide, please. So this is called the Springwater on the Willamette. So the earlier Springwater, and we'll get to a map where we can piece this all together for you, but this is the portion of the Springwater railroad line that comes into Portland from a southeast Portland neighborhood right along the banks of the Willamette River. So we actually started calling this one Springwater on the Willamette. It opened in 2005. This is a beautiful 3-mile connection from the original Springwater, that 17-mile long piece that we purchased in 1990 to connect to the East Bank Esplanade in downtown Portland. So this was another coup for the 40-mile loop in 2005. Next slide. Another Springwater story. Remember the bridge that ODOT saved all that money on? Well, we actually had to rebuild it, but we rebuilt it as a trail bridge along with 2 other bridges. So this was the 3-bridge project in 2006. And you're looking at a bridge that was built over Highway 99E, where the railroad bridge had to be taken out. This bridge would never support a railroad. It's not built to that capacity. So at any rate, this is what we have now, and it closed a big gap in the Springwater, although we're still 6 blocks short, and we can get into that later too. You can see that. Next slide. So this is a piece of trail with a beautiful view of the Sandy and Columbia Rivers. And it's at the far northeast corner of the 40-mile loop out in the city of Troutdale. And it's been sitting there since 2008. We were glad that it was constructed at the time. I think it was probably constructed due to adjacent development because next to it, there's this enormous FedEx facility. But we're looking forward to next year when it will actually get connected back to other sections of the 40-mile loop. And more on that later as well. Next slide. Meanwhile, Gresham and Fairview, two cities just east of Portland, we're working on this section of trail, a north-south trail that runs about 5.25 miles from the Springwater up to the Marine Drive Trail on the Columbia River. And the first two sections happened in 2008 and 2010. And we're happy to say that in the near future, there's going to be an extension to that, and it'll be down to like 9/10 of a mile from full completion. Next slide. We had in 2014, a bridge across a railroad. Well, maybe no big deal, but it really opened up, was the first big thing that happened on the North Portland Greenway. So here again, a map will be helpful, and we'll get to it so we can kind of knit this story together for you. But this is the first major project on the North Portland Greenway that ultimately will connect the East Bank Esplanade from in downtown Portland to Kelly Point Park, which is the confluence of the Willamette and the Columbia Rivers. Next slide. This is the Barbara Walker Crossing, and this is in the pedestrian section of the 40-mile loop on the west side. This bridge honors a former board member of the 40-mile loop, and we thank Ed Carpenter for his design work and the Portland Parks Foundation for the fundraising that they did to make this happen. This crosses a very busy local road known as West Burnside, and it has been a need for years and years and was finally accomplished in 2019. Next slide. So 2022 is the best year we've had for funding on the 40-mile loop in a very long time. And the reason is that our partner at Metro had a bond measure money that they were distributing through a grant process. And there was also some federal money in that mix. So we were fortunate to get 6 projects funded in the 40-mile loop to a total of about $20 million, which is pretty impressive. And we're very happy about that. And we'll see progress in the next few years. And the next slide can show you where, if you go to the next. So this slide shows you where those projects are occurring. Actually, it's a kind of a mixture of funding sources. So all those white bubbles pointing towards green segments of the trail are projects that were funded with that $20 million round of funding. The sort of tan projects are projects that are being completed by private developers as a requirement to meet the city code. So there's one in Southwest along the Southwest Willamette Greenway, and then the University of Portland is building a section in North Portland. And the gray ones they were funded by funds from other sources. So this is the kind of action that we're looking forward to over the next few years. And all those green gaps that you see in the system will be closed, hopefully. Next slide. So back to the Metro story. So now that Metro is in the planning business for a regional trail system, the scope of the whole regional trail system expanded yet again. And so this map shows the Olmsted map and the 40-mile loop map superimposed over the regional trails map to give you an idea of scale of the regional trail system that we're now working on. And all of this goes directly back to that Olmsted plan of 1903. So we're very, very thankful that Olmsted came to Portland in 1903 and got us going in this whole business. The next slide shows you, we're back to the 40-mile loop. And this slide is the color coding is explained. All of the orange pieces are complete. The yellow pieces are gaps. The green pieces are funded gaps. And then we have special issues in some areas. On the west side, you see the long purple line. That is the pedestrian component of the 40-mile loop. And the Barbara Walker Bridge that you saw it crosses an important local roadway on that purple line. But the purple line mainly is the Markham Trail in southwest Portland and the Wildwood Trail in northwest Portland, extending up through Forest Park. So that's a quick and dirty look at our system. The other thing I can do, if we have follow-up questions about specific portions of this loop, is well, I don't know if I can do it now because I actually have a live version of this map at the 40-mile loop website. And you could go there if you were curious. You could go there and you could look at specific sections of trail. And this is how we keep track of things because this is a complicated and somewhat messy project that's been going on for over 40 years, and we still have a lot of work to do. But with what is funded now, when that is built, we'll be about 73% complete. And so I like to say, well, people have to take us seriously now. But there are some challenges. If you're looking at the map and you see the sort of the white star and the red circle, that's the north end of the East Bank Esplanade, and that long yellow line that goes up along the Willamette River to the north and west and finally terminates at Kelly Point Park, where the Willamette and the Columbia come together. That's 14 miles. And there are some funded sections in there, but there's a lot of work to do, more bridges to go across highways and sloughs that need to be built. And we don't actually know where the next dollar is coming from. So that's the nature of our project. It's been feast or famine. We're happy to have that great year of 2022 funding sources, but really, we're probably going to have to wait till another round of bond measure money or maybe some federal money to help us out. So if we could go back to regular view, I'd be happy to respond to questions or entertain any kind of discussion that you'd like to run. Thanks.
Geez, Jim, that was absolutely terrific. I think you can tell from some of the comments in the chat that people are just amazed at how much you've been able to get done. It's just inspiring. And what strikes me too is that to see how communities have revisited some of the early plans of the Olmsteds and discovered how relevant they are to contemporary needs, I find fascinating. Here in Portland, the 1903 report, Stanford went back to the old Olmsted design, decided that they would re-implement that on the college campus. Lake Wales, same thing. These were designs by Frederick Olmsted Jr. in the 20s and 30s that they're now realizing had a lot of sense in them. So it's an interesting message that we're seeing, and that these designs were visionary in so many ways. So with that, let me turn it over to questions. Who wants to go visit soon?
Oh, I have, good afternoon, everyone. This is Winifred Victor Hines. I'll try to get on camera. I'm getting over a cold, so, and my camera hasn't been working that well either. But thank you so much for this presentation. It is indeed absolutely amazing. And so I have a question about the funding, because that's always something that we grapple with. And so have you tried to apply for funding in terms of environmental justice issues or preservation? I don't know if the park, if there are any environmental justice issues attached to it, but especially now with Justice 40, there are loads and loads of funding for it.
Well, thank you for that question. I don't believe we have tried that avenue of funding yet. I know it has been, it's understood and is available locally, but I don't think that we have actually made a move toward funds. And let me explain one thing about the 40 Mile Loop too. The 40 Mile Loop is a 501c3 organization organized as a land trust, thinking that the initial thinking was that we were maybe going to hold title to land and so on. And we may have had a kind of a pass-through easement situation in our past, but we haven't done much of that. We're basically an advocacy group. So we ask our local partners, which includes the cities of Portland, Troutdale, Gresham, and Fairview, and Metro, the regional government, to actually do that kind of work for us. I know that Metro in particular is pretty savvy with respect to where all the funds, where all the money is hidden under the rocks, you know. So they have been very helpful for us to try to get in the right line where we'll have the success. That is one funding source, though, that we need to investigate with our partners. And so thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you. I mean, absolutely amazing. I commend you. Yeah, wonderful.
Come see it.
I will when I get a chance.
Okay.
Thank you.
So next, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, very impressive. Although it goes by quickly, I'm sure, you know, we have to remind ourselves it was a many-year effort. I'm wondering a lot on the color-coded map where some of the sections were on road. I wonder if you could talk about any pushback from motorists.
Okay. Well, both motorists and, you know, trail users want a safe environment. So the where we share the road, our standards are pretty high. So we share the road only on very low volume, low speed areas. So there's an example would be along the Columbia River in the Bridgeton neighborhood. Bridgeton Road is like a neighborhood street with very low volume, slow moving traffic. It's just not a problem there. There are some areas, we cross the St. John's Bridge in North Portland, and you should take a look at that sometime. It's a little scary. They actually, the PBOT and ODOT both have a hand in this, and they put what they call sharrows on the street so that as an indication to motor traffic that you might have a bicyclist on the bridge. Me personally, myself, I would not do that. And in fact, it's a scary bridge to walk across. This was the bridge that was kind of the precursor to the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a suspension bridge over the Willamette River. And it is, if you have any acrophobia, it could be terrifying to you. So I look forward to, you know, maybe 50 years from now, there'll be a pedestrian bridge that would be in place for just pedestrians and bicyclists. So there are weak spots in the loop as it's kind of laid out right now, but not many of them, really, all things considered.
Thank you. You're fortunate that the low volume roads were in the right place to be
Yes.
connectors.
Marlene,
Okay, what a really fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. The pictures were really informative too. I was curious about the trails because it's called multi-use, but are they like graded for bicycles? And it seems like there's a lot of like really long straight stretches. So I don't know what types of amenities are located along these trails and kind of how that all develops. We know that Olmsted is into mystery and curvy trails, so I see a little bit of a departure there.
Well, that's true. The system is stretched out along the Columbia River in large part. And then, of course, because we acquired a railroad line, those are going to be very long and straight stretches. Yet they're critical to the success. At one point in time, where the spring water runs from Portland out towards Gresham and beyond in southeast Portland, the thought was that it would follow Johnson Creek. Now that would have been a whole lot more interesting in terms of having the curves and the sinuosity that you would maybe like to see running along a creek. However, I think there were probably 250 or 500 private parcels that we would have had to have acquired the rights to. So when the railroad idea came up, it was a no-brainer for us, and we just took it. So along the spring water, there are a few public amenities. As a former parks worker, I know that restroom facilities are often the targets of vandals and other trouble, shall we say, and that so they're few, but they do go through commercial areas and neighborhoods, and also you can, I mean, I've biked myself all the way out to the city of Boring from southeast Portland and back, and I didn't really even need to stop at a restroom, or I bring my own bottled water. That's what you have to do on a trail sometimes. But yes, the amenities are kind of stretched out on this 150-mile system. I'll say that for sure.
Jim, a question for you on the street you mentioned, a low volume, slow moving traffic. I'm curious, does it have speed bumps, and what is the speed limit on that road? Because this is a challenge we're seeing in a number of Olmsted parks, which are dealing with questions of opening their roads, keeping traffic on the roads, et cetera. So I'd be curious
Right.
about that.
Well, the one I mentioned earlier in Bridgeton does not have speed bumps. And I'm guessing that the speed limit might be as low as 20. I think Portland is moving towards lower speed limits on neighborhood streets in general. And we're also hearing the bicycling community in Portland is pretty loud about their desire to have protected bike lanes. And so in a way, the street system may be moving towards the 40-mile loop, because we're all about, I mean, by and large, we're about separated facilities. That's what we want. That's our standard. And so there's been enough concern about safety on public streets that speed limits are going down, and we're talking about actual physical protections, not just painted lines and little vertical plastic tubes that are supposed to do the job, but they don't do it completely. We have inattentive drivers here too. It's a problem everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Well, this has just been a fascinating presentation. Before we depart, I just want to make certain that if we have any newcomers, that we've had introductions, and obviously now is also an opportunity for our partners here to share anything or to ask questions of others on this call. I know we met Becky Taylor very early on from Cadwallader Park. Do we have any other new attendees today? Mary Ann.
Hi, I'm a new attendee. I'm actually the interim executive director for Forest Park Conservancy. So I wanted to hear from Jim and meet all of you. So thank you so much. Yes, Jim, it was an incredible presentation. I learned a lot. I live in Southeast Portland and use all of the trail systems. So it was great to hear about this.
Well, thank you, Marianne. I met you at the was it the refectory or when you introduced your IPA?
Yes.
I
yes,
I did want to mention to Leslie and Dee Dee that we have beer in Portland too, and really good beer actually. And so the Forest Park Conservancy, as part of their 75th anniversary of the park, introduced Forest Park IPA. So good job there. And I also wanted to mention that Richard, to everybody in the notes, found the link to the map that we have up on our website. So yes, Richard, that's it. And it's got 10 layers of trails that you can turn on and off to simplify or not. It shows the entire region. I have to say, this is a personal project of mine that started out as a 40-mile loop map. Okay, but it got out of hand. And so I ended up putting all the trails that I could find on the region, and also included what we call community paths and local park paths. And if you want to see curvilinear pathway systems, go to this and click on Mount Tabor Park in Southeast Portland, and take a look at the trails that we have in that wonderful Southeast Portland Park. They were laid out by Emmanuel Mish, who was an Olmsted protege, and was I think he actually was an engineer, but he laid out all the roads and trails in Mount Tabor Park in Southeast.
Fantastic.
So have fun with the map, especially if you're if you're coming to Portland, take a look at it before you come.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I would like to just say thank you again to Jim for a fantastic presentation, and thanks to all of you for what you were doing. If you haven't read about Morningside, go to our new Homestead Trail edition of that, and look at our shared blog, where you can find all sorts of interesting activities underway. But until we meet again, we'll see everybody next month, with thanks to everyone.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.